Rain poured in thick sheets over the narrow street, turning the asphalt into a river of silver. The night air crackled with tension. Flashing red and blue lights painted the darkness in a chaotic dance. Amid the confusion, a young woman in a worn yellow raincoat clutched her tote bag and quickened her pace. Her name was Amira, a nurse returning home from her late shift, exhausted yet alert, guided only by instinct through the storm. As she turned a corner, she froze. Two masked men were dragging someone into an alley. Their movements were quick, desperate, and violent. A muffled groan escaped from their victim, a tall man in a police uniform, his badge barely visible in the flickering streetlight. Amira's heart pounded. For a split second, her fear screamed at her to run. But something in the officer's strained eyes, a silent plea, anchored her feet to the ground. Without thinking, she dropped her bag and grabbed a metal rod from a nearby trash bin. "Hey!" she shouted, her voice slicing through the rain. The men turned, startled. Amira charged forward, swinging wildly, hitting one of them on the arm. He cursed and stumbled back. The other lunged at her, but she screamed, a raw, piercing sound that drew attention from a nearby patrol car. The attackers bolted into the night just as two more officers arrived. Amira stood trembling, soaked, breathless, staring at the injured man she'd just saved. He was bleeding from the temple, his eyes heavy but steady. You saved me," he whispered hoarsely. She knelt beside him, checking his pulse like second nature. "You're lucky I'm a nurse," she said, forcing a shaky smile. "Can you stand?" The man tried to rise but stumbled. She supported him until backup rushed in to help. As they carried him to safety, one officer asked for her name. "Amira Malik," she replied quietly, brushing the wet hair from her face. Later, at the hospital, when she came to check on him, the officer was awake, no longer in uniform, dressed in a crisp white shirt. He looked more like a businessman than a cop now. His smile was faint but warm. "You shouldn't have risked your life for me," he said softly. "Those men were dangerous." "I couldn't just watch," Amira replied, shrugging modestly. "I've seen enough people die to know when someone still has a chance." He studied her, intrigued. "I'm Ethan," he said. "Detective Ethan Lawrence." "Nice to meet you, Detective," she said, extending her hand. But as he shook it, there was something unspoken in his gaze, gratitude mixed with curiosity, and something deeper he couldn't name. Days turned into weeks. Ethan recovered quickly, but he couldn't get Amira out of his mind. She was nothing like the people he usually met. She had no interest in his status, no pretense, no hidden motives. He didn't tell her that he wasn't just a detective. He was the son of Richard Lawrence, one of the most influential billionaires in the country. Ethan had joined the police against his father's wishes, craving purpose beyond wealth and privilege. When he visited Amira again, it wasn't for gratitude. It was to see the woman who had risked her life for a stranger. "You're not easy to forget," he said when they met at a quiet cafe, the soft hum of jazz filling the air. Amira chuckled. "Neither are you, Detective. Not many people survive a night like that." He smiled but hesitated. "There's something I never told you about who I am." Amira tilted her head, intrigued. "Something tells me you're not just another police officer." He sighed. "My father owns Lawrence Enterprises. I'm his only son." Her eyes widened slightly. "A millionaire's son pretending to be a cop? That's unexpected." "It's the only way I know who I really am," he admitted. "People see the money, not the man." Amira leaned back, her expression unreadable. "I see a man who almost got himself killed in an alley," she said dryly, then smiled. "But I'm glad I was there." Ethan laughed softly. "You saved more than my life that night." She blinked. "What do you mean?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "You reminded me what real courage looks like. I've lived my life behind walls, of privilege, of protection. You faced danger without hesitation. You made me question everything." Amira felt something stir in her chest, something unfamiliar and warm. She wasn't used to attention, especially from someone like him. But there was sincerity in his words that made her heart soften. Their connection deepened quietly. Coffee meetings turned into long walks. Conversations stretched past midnight, and laughter replaced the silence of two people who had always been alone in different ways. Yet, not everyone approved. When Ethan's father discovered who Amira was, a nurse from a modest neighborhood, without wealth or connections, he was furious. You're throwing your future away for a girl who has nothing. Richard thundered in his study. You'll embarrass this family. Ethan stood his ground. She has more integrity than anyone I know, including half the people you do business with. You think love pays the bills? You think it'll keep your legacy alive? Ethan's jaw tightened. Maybe it'll keep me alive. The argument tore the household apart. Amira, meanwhile, found herself caught in the storm of media attention when rumors about Ethan's identity spread. Cameras followed her, reporters questioned her motives, and people whispered that she'd trapped a rich man with sympathy. One evening, overwhelmed, she went to see Ethan. Maybe your father's right, she said quietly. Maybe we come from worlds too far apart. He took her hand gently. Amira, the night you saved me, you didn't ask who I was. You just acted. That's the person I fell for. Not the nurse, not the hero, but you. Tears welled in her eyes, but she turned away, struggling to find words. Then you'll have to prove that love is stronger than your father's power, she whispered. Ethan nodded slowly. Then I will. He made a decision that night that would change everything. One that would test his loyalty, his courage, and the meaning of love itself. He walked into his father's office the next morning and said, I'm leaving the company. I'll make my own name, my own way. Richard Lawrence stared at him in disbelief. You're giving up everything? No, Ethan said firmly. I'm building something real. His father laughed bitterly. And what will you build with a nurse who lives in a rented flat? Ethan smiled faintly. A life worth living. But fate, as it often does, had its own plans. Because just when Ethan thought he could finally build a future with Amira, an unexpected threat from his past returned. One that would force him to make the hardest choice of his life. A week later, the world seemed calm again, but only on the surface. Ethan and Amira spent quiet evenings together, away from the noise of the city and the flashing cameras that had once hunted them. They'd found a small apartment on the edge of town, one with peeling walls and the faint scent of rain in the hallways. For the first time, Ethan felt something resembling peace. He still carried the memory of his father's disappointment, but with Amira, he learned to breathe again. She made simple moments beautiful, the way she hummed while cooking, the way she laughed when he burned toast, the way she never cared for luxury, yet somehow brought warmth into every corner of his life. One evening, as they sat by the window with coffee mugs in hand, Amira glanced at him. Do you ever regret it? Walking away from all of it. Ethan smiled faintly, his gaze lost in the distant skyline. Every now and then. But then I look at you, and I remember why I did it. Her lips curved into a soft smile, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of worry. I just don't want you to lose everything because of me. You didn't take anything from me, he said firmly. You showed me what I was missing. Before she could reply, his phone buzzed on the table. The number was unfamiliar, but the message froze him instantly. Detective Lawrence, we need you back. It's urgent. He frowned, then stood abruptly. It's from the department, he muttered. Amira set her cup down, her expression turning serious. What's wrong? I don't know. But if they're calling me after everything that happened, it can't be good. When he arrived at the precinct later that night, the air was heavy with tension. Captain Hayes met him at the entrance, his face grave. Ethan, I wouldn't have called if it wasn't serious, the captain said, pulling him aside. The same men who attacked you, they're back. And this time, they're not after money. Ethan's stomach tightened. Then what do they want? They've been targeting high-profile families, rich heirs, CEOs, even politicians. We think it's an organized group. Someone's funding them. The realization struck him hard. You think my family's next? Hayes nodded grimly. We intercepted chatter about a hit planned on your father. Ethan exhaled slowly, his mind racing. Despite their feud, despite all the anger, Richard Lawrence was still his father. When? Soon. Too soon. By the time Ethan got home, it was past midnight. Amira was waiting by the door, her face pale when she saw his expression. What happened? They're after my father, he said. The same men from that night. Her hand flew to her mouth. Ethan, I have to protect him. She hesitated. Even after everything he said to you? He's still my father, he said quietly. If anything happens to him and I do nothing, I'll never forgive myself. Amira nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. Then I'm coming with you. He blinked in surprise. Amira, no? This is dangerous. So was that alley, remember? She replied, her tone steady. And I didn't walk away then. I won't now. He wanted to argue, but the determination in her eyes silenced him. The next morning, they drove to the Lawrence estate, a sprawling mansion surrounded by iron gates and manicured gardens that looked almost too perfect to be real. Yet, beneath the grandeur, there was tension in the air. Security guards were on high alert, their movements sharp and restless. Richard Lawrence stood at the top of the marble staircase when they entered, his expression unreadable. "You came," he said, almost in disbelief. Ethan nodded. "You're in danger, Dad. The people who came after me, they're planning something." Richard's face darkened. "I've heard whispers. I thought they were empty threats." "They're not. You need to leave the city, at least for a while." The older man's pride bristled. "I don't run from threats. I built an empire standing my ground. And you'll lose it if you don't listen." Ethan snapped, his voice rising. "This isn't about business. It's about survival." For a moment, silence filled the grand hall, until Amira stepped forward gently. "Mr. Lawrence," she said softly, "you don't have to run. Just trust Ethan. He's not your enemy." Richard's gaze shifted to her, his expression softening slightly. "You're the nurse, aren't you? The one who saved him?" Amira nodded. He studied her for a long moment before sighing. "Very well. What's your plan, detective?" Ethan exhaled in relief. "We'll increase security and monitor all communication lines. But first, I need access to your private network. Whoever's targeting you knows too much. It could be someone close." They spent the next 2 days turning the mansion into a fortress. Ethan coordinated with his old team, installing surveillance and tracking digital threats. Amira stayed by his side, helping where she could, even tending to exhausted guards and preparing meals when no one else remembered to eat. At night, when the chaos settled, Ethan would find her in the garden, sitting beneath the old oak tree, her eyes lost in thought. "You should rest," he'd say. "So should you," she'd reply, smiling faintly. They'd share quiet moments there, amid the soft rustle of leaves and distant hum of security radios, both pretending not to notice the storm that was about to break. On the third night, it did. Around 2 a.m., the power went out. The mansion plunged into darkness. Ethan bolted upright, his instincts kicking in. "Stay here," he told Amira, grabbing his gun. She caught his arm. "Ethan, please," he said, eyes locked on hers. "Just stay low." He moved swiftly through the corridors, the flashlight beam slicing through the dark. Shadows danced across the walls, until he heard the faint click of a door downstairs. He crept closer, heart pounding. 2 figures in black moved through the living room, silent, disciplined. They weren't amateurs. Then, without warning, a third figure appeared behind him, too close. A struggle erupted, and Ethan barely managed to block a knife aimed for his throat. The sound of gunfire exploded through the mansion. Amira, hearing the chaos, ran toward the stairs despite his warning. She could see flashes of light, gunshots, shouting, and then Ethan's voice yelling her name. "Amira, get back." But before she could move, one of the intruders spotted her. A man lunged, grabbing her arm. She screamed, twisting away, knocking over a vase as she struggled. The noise distracted him just long enough for Ethan to tackle the attacker from behind. The fight was brutal and fast. Ethan managed to disarm one, but another fired, the bullet grazing his shoulder. Amira rushed forward, pulling him behind a pillar, her hands trembling as she pressed on the wound. "Ethan, stay with me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm fine," he grunted, forcing himself up. "Where's my father?" A voice echoed from the hall, cold, mocking. "Looking for me, detective?" It was a man in a dark suit, stepping out from the shadows. His face was familiar, one of Richard's former associates, Darren Cole, a name Ethan hadn't heard in years. "Darren," Richard's voice boomed from the stairs. "You dare come here?" "Dare?" Darren sneered. "You built your empire by ruining men like me. Tonight, I take it back." He raised his gun, but Ethan was faster. In a split second, he fired, hitting Darren's arm. The gun clattered to the floor. Chaos erupted again, shouts, footsteps, breaking glass, until finally, the intruders fled into the night as sirens wailed in the distance. Ethan collapsed against the wall, breathing heavily. Amira knelt beside him, her hands covered in his blood. "You're losing too much," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "You really don't listen, do you?" Tears filled her eyes. "Not when it comes to you." Richard approached slowly, staring at them, his son, wounded but defiant, and the woman who refused to leave his side. For the first time, something in the billionaire's proud eyes changed. "You saved us both," he said quietly, looking at Amira. "Twice." But even as relief began to settle over them, Ethan's phone buzzed again. He looked down, and his face went pale. The message on the screen read, "This was only the beginning." Ethan stared at the message, his pulse thundering in his ears. The words glowed on the cracked screen like a curse. This was only the beginning. The storm outside had grown violent again, lightning flashing across the sky, the mansion groaning under the weight of the wind. The air inside felt charged with something heavier than fear. It was the weight of unfinished danger. Amira knelt beside him, her voice trembling. "What does it mean?" He looked up, his expression cold now, the softness gone. "It means they're not done. Darren was just a pawn." Richard, standing near the staircase, clenched his fists. "A pawn for who?" Ethan rose slowly, the blood on his shoulder drying into dark stains. "Someone who wants everything you built to burn, and who knows exactly where to strike next." The police arrived minutes later, arresting Darren and securing the property, but Ethan couldn't rest. His instincts screamed that this wasn't over. He knew that message wasn't just a threat, it was a promise, a warning meant for him. While the officers questioned the staff, Ethan walked outside into the rain. The garden lights flickered weakly, illuminating the soaked driveway. He felt Amira's presence before he saw her. She came up behind him, her umbrella trembling in her hand. "You're thinking of going after them," she said quietly. "I don't have a choice." Her voice cracked. "You always have a choice, Ethan." He turned, meeting her eyes. "They'll come again. And next time, they won't stop until someone's dead. I can't wait for that to happen." Tears welled in her eyes, glistening like the raindrops clinging to her lashes. "You've already given up your life once for people who didn't see you. Don't do it again." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I'm not doing this for them, Amira. I'm doing this for us. For the future they're trying to destroy before it even begins." She wanted to argue, but something in his voice, that calm, steady certainty, silenced her. "Then promise me one thing," she whispered. "You'll come back." He hesitated, then pulled her close. "I'll always come back to you." 2 days later, Ethan disappeared into the city. He went undercover again, following leads through the dark corners of the underworld he once swore to leave behind. It was a world of lies, money, and blood, and it led him to one name that kept surfacing in whispers: Victor Hale, a ruthless businessman, long rumored to have ties with crime syndicates, and an old rival of Richard Lawrence. The discovery hit Ethan like a punch. Hale had reason, motive, and enough power to launch an operation that large. And if Darren was working under him, the attack had been part of a much bigger plan, a personal vendetta disguised as chaos. For weeks, Ethan gathered evidence, tracking Hale's network of shell companies and offshore accounts. Every step drew him deeper into danger. He lived in shadows, surviving on little sleep and less food, driven by the thought of Amira's face, the way she had looked at him under the rain, begging him to return. Back at the Lawrence estate, Amira stayed with Richard. The old man had changed since that night. He spent hours watching the news, pacing the halls like a man haunted by ghosts. One evening, he found Amira sitting in the garden, holding Ethan's jacket. "He's not just chasing criminals," Richard said quietly. "He's chasing redemption." Amira looked up, surprised by the softness in his tone. "You sound proud." Richard sighed. "For the first time, I am. I raised a son who doesn't hide behind his name. I just wish I'd realized it sooner." Days blurred into weeks, until one night, as Amira was locking up, the phone rang. A distorted voice on the other end sent her blood cold. "Tell your hero to stop digging, or you'll never see him again." The line went dead before she could respond. Panic seized her chest. She immediately called Captain Hayes, who confirmed Ethan had gone silent 12 hours ago during a sting operation. His last known location was an abandoned dockyard near the industrial district. Without thinking, Amira grabbed her coat and drove into the night. The rain returned, a merciless downpour that made the city lights blur into streaks of color. Every instinct screamed that she was making a mistake, but her heart refused to let her stay behind. When she reached the docks, the place was eerily quiet. Crates and rusted containers loomed in the darkness. She found Ethan's car parked nearby, The door ajar, the engine still warm. "Ethan," she called, her voice echoing. Then she heard it, muffled shouting from inside one of the warehouses. She slipped through a side door, heart pounding, and froze at the sight before her. Ethan was tied to a chair under a flickering light, blood streaking his face, but his eyes still burned with defiance. Standing before him was Victor Hale himself, tall, composed, wearing a sharp suit that reeked of arrogance. "You should have stayed in your rich boy world," Hale sneered. "You think wearing a badge makes you untouchable?" Ethan spat blood onto the floor. "It makes me better than you." Hale's smirk vanished. He raised his gun. Not for long. Amira's breath caught. Without thinking, she grabbed a metal pipe from the ground and stepped out of the shadows, her voice shaking but loud. "Put it down." Hale turned, startled. Well, the nurse. How touching." Ethan's eyes widened in horror. "Amira, get out." "Not without you," she shouted. Hale laughed coldly. "You people and your loyalty. It's adorable and pathetic." He aimed the gun at her, but in that split second of distraction, Ethan kicked the chair backward, slamming it into Hale's legs. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the small space, but the bullet missed. Amira swung the pipe with all her strength, hitting Hale's arm. The gun clattered across the floor. Ethan, bleeding but fueled by adrenaline, broke free from the ropes and lunged at him. They fought brutally, fists, shouts, the echo of violence filling the air, until finally, Ethan drove him into the ground. Sirens wailed outside as the police burst in moments later. Hale was arrested, dragged away screaming threats, while Ethan collapsed to his knees, exhausted and trembling. Amira dropped beside him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You idiot," she whispered, half sobbing, half laughing. "You promised you'd come back." He smiled weakly, resting his forehead against hers. "And I did." By morning, the storm had cleared. The sky over the city glowed gold and pink, washing away the night's terror. The news spread like wildfire. Victor Hale's criminal empire exposed, Richard Lawrence publicly vindicated, and Detective Ethan Lawrence hailed as the man who took down a billionaire crime lord. At the hospital, while Ethan's wounds were being treated, Richard visited quietly. For the first time, there was no pride, no arrogance, just a father standing before his son. "You saved my life and my name," Richard said softly. "But more than that, you reminded me what honor looks like. I spent my life chasing power. You found meaning." Ethan looked at him, tired but calm. "I didn't do it for your empire, Dad. I did it for what's right." Richard nodded slowly. "And that's why you deserve everything I once thought you didn't." His gaze drifted toward Amira, who stood near the window. "You were right about her, too." When Richard left, Amira came closer, holding his hand. "So what now?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Now, we start over. No secrets. No lies. Just us." Months passed. The world eventually moved on from the headlines, but Ethan and Amira didn't crave the spotlight. They bought a small home near the edge of the city, where mornings smelled of coffee and rain, and nights were filled with laughter instead of sirens. Ethan returned to work quietly, mentoring young officers. Amira continued at the hospital, her compassion touching every life she met. One evening, as the sun dipped low, they sat on the porch, watching the golden light stretch across the sky. "Do you ever miss it?" Amira asked softly. "The mansion, the luxury?" He chuckled. "Sometimes. But then I look at you, and I realize I already have everything I ever wanted." She smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You always know what to say." "I've had good teachers," he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The wind carried the faint scent of jasmine from the garden. In the distance, thunder rumbled again, but this time, it wasn't a warning. It was a reminder that storms could come and go, and still, some things endured. Amira closed her eyes, whispering, "You know, when I saw you that night in the alley, I never thought it would lead to all this." Ethan smiled, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Neither did I. Sometimes fate hides behind the craziest moments." She laughed softly. "Like saving a stranger in the rain?" He nodded. "Exactly like that." They sat in silence, the world around them quiet and still. And in that moment, between the dying light and the first stars, their story felt like something bigger than survival, bigger than love. It was proof that even in a world full of wealth, betrayal, and violence, The truest things were born not from power or privilege, but from courage, compassion, and the choices we make when no one's watching. And for Ethan and Amira, that night in the rain had been the beginning of everything. The moment two strangers collided and unknowingly rewrote the course of their lives forever.